And Ryan, you will remind folks about to put the questions in the chat and all that kind of stuff. Okay, thank you.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us so far. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. As you have questions as we go throughout this presentation, you can either enter those into the chat box or you can enter them into WebEx's Q&A function. We are going to be answering those questions in writing following the end of this webinar. The webinar is also being recorded, and we'll have that posted to the website about 24 hours after the webinar concludes. All right, I have 2 o'clock. Thank you all to everyone that has joined us. We're going to get started now. As we go throughout today's presentation, if you have any questions, you can enter those into either the chat box or the Q&A function of WebEx. We are going to be addressing those questions in writing following the conclusion of the webinar. Additionally, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our website within 24 hours of the conclusion of the meeting. So without any further ado, Dr. John Payne, if you want to begin.
Good afternoon and hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm not sure if State Superintendent will be able to join us this afternoon. She had hoped to give some welcoming comments, but I will certainly try to do my best in her stead. As Ryan said, my name is John Payne, and I am the Deputy Superintendent over our Division of Federal Programs and Accountability at the department. And I oversee all of our programs under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, which is what used to be known as No Child Left Behind, our special education federal programs, our school transformation assessment, as well as our emergency relief programs, which includes now the emergency assistance to non-public schools. So thank you for joining us in this overview session, and more importantly, thank you for what you have done and continue to do for your students in our private schools in South Carolina to address the ongoing impact caused by COVID-19. The purpose of this technical assistance session is to provide you with an overview of the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public School, or EANS program, as authorized by the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. The goal of our session is to provide you as interested parties with an understanding of these EANS funds, the fund requirements, and the processes that the Department of Education will use to administer these funds. I do want to say a special acknowledgement to the number of staff here at the Department of Education, Mr. Ryan Brown, our Director of Public Information, John Massengill, Caroline Hines, and Joshua Byers, who are our coordinators who are helping to coordinate all of this work, and a number of other staff within the Department of Education. So the first thing we wanted to do to start out is to say that this is a brand new program. I have been working in federal education programs for a long time, and never in the history of federal education programs and funding has a program like this ever existed. So I share that to say we are working at our very best to make sure that our work is streamlined, simplified, and efficient, but we also recognize that we're quite literally building the plane as we're flying it. So I mentioned that to say we're still working to figure out all of the requirements and how we will do all of this together. But we do just ask for your patience and understanding and your thought partnering with us to help address issues as and if they crop up. And again, with our hope that this is going to be as streamlined and simple as possible. I also want to give a special acknowledgement to the private school associations for their continued help and support in getting this program underway. Specifically, we want to acknowledge the South Carolina Catholic Conference, the Diocese of Charleston, the South Carolina Independent School Association, the Palmetto Association of Independent Schools, and the South Carolina Association of Christian Schools. Folks from these organizations have met with us on multiple occasions and have really helped continue the discussion, think through questions with us, and have been very helpful. So we do offer a sincere thanks to these organizations and many others who have been helping us to get this program underway. I do see that our state superintendent has joined us, so I will pause for a moment in case, Ms. Spearman, you want to say a few words in welcoming.
Thank you, John. I don't want to delay the content of this very important meeting. I don't often get to speak with our partners in education through the private and parochial schools. So I want to take this chance just to say thank you for what you all are doing. I know it's been a difficult year for all of us. You've done a remarkable job keeping your schools open. I know that you have extra financial needs. Um, you're serving more students. Many of our families who were not able to have a face-to-face option within the public system have moved to your schools. So we appreciate being partners with you on this. I've asked our staff to work as quickly as they can to help you and to get this funding out to you because I know it's greatly needed. So I just wanted to say hello, thank you, and looking forward to working together on this project.
Thank you, Superintendent Spearman. I appreciate your comments and joining us today. So the first section, or our discussion point today, is going to give you a broad overview of our EANS program. Back in on December 27th, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA, was passed by Congress and signed into law by the President. As part of this new Relief Act, the U.S. Department of Education is providing $2.75 billion in funding to EANS programs to every state that applies as part of the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or GEER fund, that the Governor's office administers. As part of the requirements of this law, each state's education department has to administer the program. So in South Carolina, we have been allocated $39,981,327 to provide assistance and services to non-public, not-for-profit schools affected by the pandemic. And of that amount, $39,781,327 is available to eligible non-public, not-for-profit schools. The remaining $200,000 we are able to keep for the administrative costs associated with administering and overseeing this program. I want to walk you through a timeline because the law, this EANS program, has some very specific and often kind of tight deadlines. So back on February the 5th of earlier this month, the Governor's office applied for our EANS grant. On February 10th, 2021, the U.S. Department of Education awarded South Carolina our EANS grant and made those funds available to the South Carolina Department of Education. Today, February 24th, we are holding a technical assistance session to disseminate information to you. Next week, on Monday, March the 1st, we will make applications available to you to complete, and you will have 30 calendar days to complete and submit your applications to us. We'll go in more detail about the applications as we get through the presentations. So that application window will close at 11:59 on March 31st, and any application received after that deadline may not be considered. We have 30 days. Once you submit your application, we have 30 days to review and respond to your applications. So assuming someone were to submit an application on the very last day, March 31st, that would take us to April 30th to approve. So we do encourage you to move swiftly in completing the applications and let us know if you have any issues or concerns or questions as you go along. So we will approve or deny any applications within 30 days. And we will have final amounts approved as soon as possible after the application's closed. Because we don't know how many private schools may apply, nor do we know how much in terms of the funds that private schools may ask, we will not know all of that information until we get the last application in, and that closes on March 31st. Once the application deadline's closed, we do plan on having an additional professional development session on payment and procurement processes, so how you get your money, how you need to invoice, that kind of thing. So we will be providing a session dedicated solely to that as we go forward. Let's talk now about private school eligibility as specified under the CRRSA Act. In order to be eligible for these EANS funds, a private school must be established as a not-for-profit entity. So a for-profit private school would not be eligible to participate in this program. A private school must have been in existence prior to March 13th, 2020. That is the date that the President signed the emergency declaration into effect and is the date that's used with these EANS programs as the very first start date. The private school also must be licensed, accredited, or otherwise approved to operate in accordance with our state law. And finally, the private school did not and will not apply for and receive a loan under the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program on or after December 27th. So an application that was made for this PPP program on or after December 27th would make a private school ineligible. However, there is a special condition. If you applied for a PPP or received a loan before December the 27th, you can still apply for EANS funds. However, you just have to assure that you will not use any EANS funds to pay for the same services or items that the PPP funds were used or will be used for. Basically, what the federal government wants to ensure is that all states and private schools are not using two pots of federal money to pay for the same thing. One of the application requirements is for private schools to provide information on low-income students enrolled in their schools for the 2019-2020 school year. So on the application, you must provide the number or estimated number of low-income students for that 1920 school year. In determining those numbers or those estimated numbers, you have a lot of options for the data sources to use as the basis for determining the poverty level. You can, for example, use free or reduced lunch price data. You can use scholarship or financial assistance data. You can use E-rate data. You can also use U.S. Census Bureau data. Specifically, what it allows for is using the U.S. Inputting the number of students from low-income families based on the American Community Survey or the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates program by the U.S. Census Bureau. Another data source that you can use is proportionality data. And proportionality data is simply the number of students enrolled in your private school who reside in a Title I school attendance area multiplied by the percentage of public school students in that same attendance area who are from low-income families. But if you have students who reside in more than one Title I school, you'll need to do multiple calculations. So we share that to note that as you begin pulling together your data, understanding the various data sources and the calculations that you will be asked for, or the numbers for us to determine your poverty rating. In addition, the EANS program requires that you provide a statement about the impact that COVID-19 has had on your school. And that will come in the form of a narrative to describe or quantify the impact that it's had, and that may include things such as loss of tuition revenue, decrease in enrollment from the 1920 to 2021 school year, lack of capacity to provide remote learning due to insufficient technology support, and or data documenting the extent of learning loss attributable to the disruptions caused by COVID-19. This will be a narrative that you have to put in the application, and we'll talk more about that as we go. So those are two of the requirements that you'll need for your application, low-income data as well as the impact of COVID-19. The reason being is that we as the state have to prioritize funding to schools with higher percentages or proportions of low-income students, and we can use this impact to assist us in making those determinations. Now let's talk about the funding categories under the EANS program. Here are some general information about the funding categories. There are 12 categories for allowable uses of these funds, and we'll go through these 12 in just a few minutes. As we think about these 12 categories, there are 3 standards that we will have to apply to all costs. First, costs must be allowable. That is to say that for a cost to be allowable, it has to fit into one of these 12 categories. Second, the costs have to be reasonable, and that is basically what a prudent person would pay for an item. For example, you can pick up a Chromebook for about $300, $700. That would be a reasonable cost. If, in fact, the Chromebook were, say, $5,000 or $6,000, that may not meet the reasonableness of it. And lastly, a cost must be necessary, and that is to say it is as a result of the ongoing impact caused by COVID-19. Private school staff salary and their fringe costs are not reimbursable. And in providing these services, if any materials, equipment, or property are reimbursed or repurchased, the ownership of those must transfer to the South Carolina Department of Education. That is a requirement in the law. As such, disposition of those materials and equipment will follow state equipment disposition regulations, policies, and procedures, which may begin on October 1st, 2023 or later. Equipment, materials, and property. Equipment is defined in one of 2 ways. It is defined as any single item whose market price or purchase cost is $2,500 or more, or any technology device such as a laptop, projector, or other device, regardless of cost. So that is what equipment is classified to be. Materials include things such as software licenses, instructional material, and comparable items. We will talk about properties, specifically with leasing, later on in Category 10. For equipment and devices, the private school and the department must complete a transfer of ownership for those materials, equipment, and/or devices, so that if it is something we are reimbursing the private school for, those devices would transfer to the ownership of the department. However, we do want to note that the department will not be responsible for maintenance or upkeep of materials, equipment, or property, nor any associated costs such as insurance, warranties, or deferred maintenance. Under the EANS program, private schools can ask for reimbursement of costs that they have incurred back to March 13th, 2020. Allowable costs may be reimbursed as long as the private school has the proper documentation and as long as those 3 conditions that I just mentioned, allowable, reasonable, and necessary, are met. Unallowable costs will not be reimbursed. Private schools will need to identify the service, that is, which of the 12 categories, a description of the service, the funding category, and the actual amount for reimbursement costs. Reimbursements provided to the private school do not mean that the school becomes a recipient of federal financial assistance, and that is also spelled out in the law. And again, only expenses that go back to March 13th will be considered. So anything that you purchased prior to March 13th cannot be included in your application and cannot be reimbursed. Reimbursement requests must be submitted by August 15th following the close of the state fiscal year on June 30th. So every year, South Carolina operates on a state fiscal calendar, which goes from July 1st until June 30th. We then give folks about 6 weeks or until August 15th to get all of those reimbursement requests in. So as you think about in planning for requesting reimbursement for expenses that you have incurred between March 13th, 2020, all the way to this upcoming June 30th, 2021, we need you to submit those requests for reimbursements by August the 15th, 2021. That enables us to close out that state fiscal year. If we get a request for expenditures during that time that get submitted after August 15th, it may be automatically declined. So we do encourage you to get those reimbursement costs in just as soon as you have an approved application. Now I want to talk about our EANS procurement threshold specifically for reimbursement. So as you were thinking about what you may want to ask for reimbursements, just know that, again, costs must be allowable. That is, they meet one of the 12 categories. They must be reasonable. In other words, the price must be what a reasonable person would pay, and necessary, and that is that you can link them to COVID-19. We will review unit prices and compare them to like items that are available in our state contracts, and we do reserve the right to approve or deny requests in part or in full, contingent upon what is being requested. So let's now talk about future purchases with respect to procurement thresholds. Again, costs must meet those three conditions: allowable, reasonable, and necessary. And quotes must be obtained prior to the request. So if you have a cost that is up to $10,000, you just need one quote or one invoice or bill. If the price is over $10,000, you will need 3 bona fide quotes from qualified sources of supply. So for example, if you were going to purchase personal protective equipment and that amount is over $10,000, you would need to get quotes from 3 sources and then use the lowest bid in the purchase. If you can't obtain the 3 quotes, we need to show that we have tried to advertise it on the school website, or provide that you have tried to get the 3 quotes, that you attempted to do that. And again, we will allow funding for the request of the lowest bid. I'm excited to say, and you'll hear more from them in a little while, that Catapult Learning is going to be providing services as our premier vendor for 4 of the 12 service allowable uses of funds. And so we'll talk more about that as we go. But this does apply to all purchases other than those provided by Catapult Learning. So what are the 12 categories? So the first category of allowable uses, in other words, these are the categories for which you can ask for reimbursement or future services. The first of these are supplies to sanitize, disinfect, and clean schools. The second category is for personal protective equipment. The third category is improving ventilation systems, including windows and portable air purification systems. The fourth category you see in this slide is bolded, because this will be a service that Catapult Learning will be providing on behalf of the state. And that is for training and professional development for staff on sanitization, the use of PPE, and minimizing the spread of infectious diseases. Another funding category, Category 5, is for physical barriers to facilitate social distancing. Category 6 is for any other materials, supplies, or equipment recommended by the Center for Disease Control for reopening and operation of school facilities to effectively maintain health and safety. Category 7 is expanding capacity to administer coronavirus testing to effectively monitor and suppress the virus. Again, this is bold because this will be one of the service areas offered by Catapult Learning. Educational technology is the 8th allowable use. Redeveloping instructional plans for remote or hybrid learning or to address learning loss is Category 9, bolded again because it will be provided by Catapult Learning. Leasing sites or spaces to ensure social distancing is Category 10. Reasonable transportation costs is Category 11. And Category 12, again bolded because it will be provided by Catapult Learning, is initiating and maintaining education and support services or assistance for remote or hybrid learning or to address learning loss. So those are the 12 allowable categories for EANS funding and services. So now what we're going to do is go and kind of dive a little deeper into these individual categories and think about it from 2 perches. One perch is going to be what this would look like from you asking for reimbursement of costs, and the other is for you're asking for future services. So the first two categories, the cleaning supplies and PPE, what would that mean if you're asking for reimbursement? Again, the cost, you would have to demonstrate that the cost is reasonable. In other words, what would it be a general amount that a prudent person would pay and necessary? And you must have a receipt or invoice that documents that you have purchased those devices. For example, let's say that before school began in August, you went out and bought $5,000 worth of cleaning supplies, paper towels, and other materials to clean the schools. As long as you have those receipts or those invoices where you paid it, you could, in your application, include that for a request for reimbursement. For future services, in other words, let's say you want to buy cleaning supplies or PPE going forward, again, costs must be reasonable and necessary. Quotes may be required prior to approval. Again, going back, if it's over $10,000, you would need 3 quotes. And the school would have the vendor submit the invoice for payment. Again, we're going to talk about at a later date in another technical assistance session exactly how all of that invoicing will occur, but just know on the front end that the vendor will have to submit an invoice for payment so that we would then provide a payment to the vendor as opposed to a payment to you. We can reimburse you. We cannot give money directly to private schools for future services. Improving ventilation systems, again, which is category 3. These costs are permitted for existing systems, not new systems. So new ventilation systems are not allowable. This is improving existing systems. So for reimbursement, again, costs must be reasonable and necessary, but we can only reimburse for portable air purification systems. That's the only part of this category that we can reimburse private schools for. So no other ventilation improvements are allowed. And again, with those portable air purification systems, you must have the invoice or receipt to show what you paid for it. Again, it would need to be on or after that March 13th deadline. In terms of future services, again, costs must be reasonable and necessary. Quotes may be required. And if in your ventilation system improvements, you have to use someone to install it, that amount for installation can be included in your application, but we would ask that that be done by a licensed, bonded, and insured contractor. And then again, the vendor would submit an invoice for payment. Staff training related to COVID-19, again, which is category 4. The reimbursement for this category is not permitted. So you cannot ask for reimbursement for staff training related to COVID-19. That is not allowed under the EANS program. Requests for future staff training must be provided by Catapult Learning, again, as our premier provider of services for this specific category. That is to say that funds cannot be provided to the non-public school for in-house training. And then with all training, which is a federal requirement, it must be secular, non-religious, and non-ideological. Physical barriers for social distancing, again, is category 5, and it must be barriers for social distancing only. In terms of reimbursements, costs, again, need to be reasonable and necessary. You must have the receipt or the invoice. And if you used your staff to install, the physical barrier, say that's plexiglass that you put in the front office, we cannot fund any portion of school staff for that, but we could pay for the actual cost of the plexiglass in that instance. So again, the example would be you purchased some plexiglass back in August to try to put between desks or maybe put in the front office. To create that social distancing, we would be able to pay for, or reimburse rather, you for the cost for that plexiglass, but not any staff. If you used your custodial staff to install it, we could not pay a portion of their salary for their time and effort in installation. With respect to future services, For physical barriers, again, costs must be reasonable and necessary. Quotes may be required for approval, particularly if it's at $10,000 or higher. Installation may be allowable, and if you need an outside person to do the installation, they need to be licensed, bonded, and insured. Private school staff, like your custodial staff, may, depending upon what you ask for and what you want to have installed, may install that, but again, those services would not be covered in terms of their salary and time. And whatever vendor, and that would be your vendor for installation and purchase, they would submit an invoice for payment. Other materials, supplies, and equipment for safely operating the school. So for the reimbursement, since what this category attends to is recommendations by the CDC, we do ask that you provide the link to the recommended usage by the CDC, again, making sure that those costs are reasonable and necessary, that you have a receipt or invoice. For any installation, we can't, again, pay for any private school staff time for that installation, and equipment conditions may exist. And what that means is if it is any educational technology or a single device that is $2,500 or more, we may have to do a transfer of ownership so that the department would then own that equipment. For future services, again, you must provide the CDC link. Costs, again, need to be reasonable and necessary. You may need quotes for approval, particularly if it goes over that $10,000 mark. Again, installation may be allowable, but if so, it needs to be completed by a licensed, bonded, and insured contractor. Depending upon what you're asking for, if there's any installation that you want your staff to do, those services would not be allowable in terms of us paying for their salary, time for that installation. The vendor or vendors then would submit an invoice for payment, and again, equipment conditions, and that is the ownership of that equipment, may exist for whatever you may ask for. Expanding capacity related to testing and monitoring, costs must be reasonable and necessary. Again, we cannot fund for salaries such as the expansion of for private school employees' time and effort or salaries. And if it is done by a third party to expand that capacity, again, we'll need that invoice. For future services, Catapult Learning is going to provide services in this area. Again, we cannot fund salaries for private school employees for testing or monitoring. And if you're using someone, say a third-party nurse, they must be able to document that they hold the appropriate licensure consistent with South Carolina law. Educational technology is Category 8, and this is one we have been spending a lot of time thinking through how this will all work. For reimbursement, again, costs need to be reasonable and necessary with that invoice or receipt. We cannot pay or reimburse for permanent technology. So, for example, if you're asking for high Wi-Fi wiring or something that goes into the walls that's a permanent feature, that is not permitted. Ownership to devices must be transferred, asset tagged, and annually inventoried. And what that means is if you ask for reimbursement for devices, so let's say, for example, that you bought 25 laptops at the beginning of the school year, we would have to do a transfer of ownership. We would then have to tag it with an asset tag, which is basically a fancy sticker with a number and a barcode, and be able to associate that laptop serial number with our asset tag so that it can be annually inventoried. At the end of the project, which ends September 30th, 2023, we will follow the disposition requirements as we use with all state property. For future services, costs must be reasonable and necessary. Again, you may need quotes for approval. No permanent technology is allowable. If we do buy something for future services, the ownership of those devices must be, again, transferred, asset tagged, and annually inventoried. We'll follow the same disposition. And just know, again, as a reminder, that maintenance and upgrades to the devices is the responsibility of the private school, but ownership of that specific device is vested in the state. Instructional planning, which is Category 9, reimbursement is not allowed for this category. So for future staff planning must be provided by Catapult Learning. Funds, again, as such, cannot be provided to the non-public school staff for developing in-house planning, and then all planning must be secular, non-religious, and non-ideological. Leasing sites and spaces is category 10. We're going to break this one up a little more because it is a little more involved. So let's talk about it from the perch of reimbursement. If you ask for reimbursement for leased sites or spaces, you must provide us a copy of the lease in advance for review and approval, along with the documentation that the space was necessary for social distancing. The lease cost must be in addition to the existing school property and only added due to the pandemic. Late fees, insurance costs, utilities, maintenance costs, and other comparable costs are not reimbursable, only the cost for the leasing of the site or the space. Any lease that was established before March 13th, 2020 is not eligible for reimbursement. So it must be a lease that was taken into consideration on or after March 13th, 2020. And lastly, the private school must assure that there's no conflict of interest with any school staff, administration, governing board, or other officials with the owner of that property or the lessor. Leasing sites in terms of future services. Again, the lease must be provided in advance for our review and approval. The department will become the lessee on behalf of the private school. The private school and the lessor or the property owner are responsible for the necessary insurance costs, repairs, and maintenance. The private school must adhere to the terms of the approved lease, including costs for damages or repairs beyond the normal wear and tear. The leased space must be ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, compliant and meet both state fire marshal and school facility requirements. The terms of the lease may not extend beyond September 30th, 2023, which is how long, again, we have to spend this money, or until no longer needed, whichever is sooner. And lastly, just as with reimbursement, the private school must assure that there is no conflict of interest with any school staff, administration, governing board, or other officials with the property owner or lessor. Transportation costs. We've been thinking about what this might look like in terms of what private schools may be asking for. So we're still thinking through this one again, building that plane as we fly it, as I talked about a little earlier. But as far as reimbursement, it is allowable, again, as long as the costs are reasonable and necessary. And you also must provide some basis for that reasonable cost. So for example, you could use a mileage rate, the federal mileage rate, which varies between 50 and 55 cents per mile, or you could do some total cost. But in whatever basis you decide, you must have the documentation, which could be an invoice, journals, or other documentation to support that basis, as well as the amounts that you are asking for reimbursement. If you ask for transportation costs for future services, again, those costs must be reasonable and necessary. You have to identify who that third-party transportation provider is, and they must be able to provide documentation that they have an applicable driver's license, insurance coverage, that kind of thing, and that provider must be able to comply with the ADA requirements if and is as necessary. Educational support and services, which is category 12, is not a category for which you can ask for reimbursement. So this is a future services only. Future services and support, future support and services rather, must be provided by Catapult Learning. So that is, again, to say, just as with the other comparable categories, that funds cannot be provided to school staff to develop in-house training. And again, all services must be secular, non-religious, and non-ideological, which is a requirement of the federal government. So that's a lot. That's the 12 categories that are allowable uses. So what we have here on this slide is basically a summary. For all 12 categories, you can ask for those expenses to be covered by in your application. for reimbursement. As you see, Category 4, which is staff training related to COVID, Category 9, which is instructional plan, and Category 12, which is remote or hybrid learning, are not allowable areas of reimbursement. With ventilation systems, which is Category 3, only portable air purification systems are allowable for reimbursement. So this is just a short summary to say what you can ask for future services and what you can or cannot ask for reimbursement. We also wanted to underscore that some of these categories are easier than others, and that is not only on the ease for the department, but also ease of you as private schools. So more involved categories may require additional calculations, documentations, and processes. So we've thought through this, and so you can see here what we've tried to think through in terms of very easy all the way to very involved. So for example, cleaning supplies. Let's say you want to buy some cleaning supplies, maybe some Clorox wipes, some paper towels, trash bags, that kind of stuff. That should be a fairly easy, as long as it's a reasonable cost. You got the documentation. That's something that's easily done. PPE, also easy. Physical barriers, other materials, ventilation. Now we're getting into a little bit of yellow because it really depends. And you may have to have a third-party person who's licensed, bonded, and insured. So that's getting a little bit more involved. When we get to things like transportation, educational technology, and leasing sites or spaces, that's really where we're going to have to get into more involved because we will have, for example, with the educational technology, it will require us to work together to complete a spreadsheet with serial numbers, asset tags that will have specific numbers and barcodes, create an inventory, that sort of thing. With leasing, that's changing up leasing and who's the leasee on that. So those are much more involved. We're not discouraging you for asking for these, but we do want you to know that these will be much more complex as we think through how we will approach it. Catapult, again, is providing services with respect to Category 4, 7, 9, and 12, and you will be hearing from them in just a little while. So those we anticipate to be green, but you will need to work with our colleagues and friends at Catapult Learning as you think through these 4 allowable uses of funds. Now let's turn our attention to the application process. What do you expect to see when these applications go live on Monday? The first thing we wanted to share with you is the allocation methodology. Again, what we don't know is exactly how many private schools will be applying for funds and how much in funding each private school will ask. So we don't really know a total amount. But we also have to prioritize based on poverty. So in scenario 1 would be where the total amount requested by all private schools is equal to or below the amount of money that we have, the $39 million. So if the private schools, if you all ask for funds and it's at or below how much money that we've got in the bank, so to speak, we will work to our very best to approve all allowable, reasonable, and necessary costs, including reimbursements, again, pursuant to the parameters outlined. The second scenario is if the total amount requested by all applicant private schools is more than the $39 million that we have in the bank, so to speak, we will calculate a relative poverty percentage for each private school and then identify what that ceiling amount would be based on poverty so that we can then, with some calculations, determine and maybe have to apportion amount down to identify how much money we will actually be able to fund, because again, it is a finite pot of money. So scenario 1 is where the total ask is at or below what we've got in the bank. We will work our very best to approve everything we can. The second possibility is where schools ask for more than we have available, and in that instance, we will have to do some calculations to come up with some amounts and may have to drop some of those requested amounts down. So the now we're going to give you a sneak peek, if you will, to the application. And we do encourage you, as Mr. Brown said when we started this session, the slides in this webinar will be posted to our EANS website. And we do encourage you to go back and take a look specifically at this section prior to getting into our online application. It is an online form, so you will simply click a link from our EANS website. It will take you to a web page, and you will click through the various pages. So the first page of the application is just the basic information. That is to say, the name of the school, the physical address. We need the physical address, not a P.O. box. We need you to put in the authorized representative and his or her contact information. The authorized representative is basically the person who has the authority to submit the application. We also need an EANS point of contact, and that would be the person that we need if we have a question or need to reach out to someone specifically, who that person would be to talk with us about the EANS program. For some of you, it may be the very same person. The EANS point of contact may be the same person as the school representative, but some of you it may not be. So for example, an authorized representative might be the head or the chief of the school, and the EANS point of contact might be a finance person. We leave that decision to you, but we do ask for 2 individuals that we can reach out to should and if or as we have any questions. So that's page 1 of the application. The second page of the application is going to pretty much be clicking through some boxes. So the top part of this page is basically affirmations for eligibility. So this is part B, which is eligibility information. So you have to affirm that you're a nonprofit. You have to affirm that you are licensed, accredited, or otherwise approved to operate in accordance with state law. You have to affirm that you existed and operated prior to March 13th. And then we have a place for you to upload a file that basically gives us the documentation of all 3 of that. And that can be one document, that could be several documents that you would combine into one document, but it's one file that we would ask that you upload. We then will ask you to affirm that you did not and will not apply for a PPP, that Payroll Protection Program grant, on or after December 27th. And lastly, if you did apply for a PPP prior to December the 27th, you just have to affirm and assure that you will not use any of those funds to pay for whatever you're asking for in this application. So that's the second page of the application. The third page of the application is where you will put in your information about your enrollment and low-income data. Again, we have to prioritize schools that enroll low-income students or that have been most impacted by COVID-19. So within this page, there are basically 3 sections. Section 1 is your enrollment and low-income data. So you'll be asked to input the number of students that you had enrolled in your private school for the 2019-2020 school year. Then you'll be asked to provide the estimated number of students, or the number or estimated number of students enrolled in your private school that were from low-income families. And then you will have to select in a drop-down one of those data sources to say, this is the data source that we used. What will then happen under that is it will automatically generate a percentage for you. So for example, let's say you have 100 students enrolled in your school. You look at one of those data, as you're looking at your data, you find out that 50 students are from low-income families. You would put 100 as your enrollment, 50 if that's your low-income, the number of low-income students. You would select whichever data source that you used, and it would come up with a percentage, in this case 50%. So that is section 1. Section 2 is about any PPP if you applied or received those funds prior to December the 27th. If you did not apply for a PPP at all, you just simply click no. If you did apply prior to December 27th, you would click yes, and then you would have to give the amount of the loan and some additional detail. The third section of this particular page is for you to write a short narrative about the impact that COVID-19 has had or continues to have in your school. And what we recommend there is that you type that impact statement up into a Word document and then just simply copy and paste it into the text box field here on this page. We think that'll save you some time. I do want to underscore that we're not looking for page after page of documentation, so be assured you're not going to have to write a dissertation in this, but just a paragraph or so, to tell us about that impact. The next page is the page, which is page 4, I think now, is really for us to get into the money. So at the top of this page, when you will click on this, you'll see again those 12 allowable categories, those statements about what is allowed for reimbursement and what's not. And then under that will be 2 check boxes. The first check box is if you're going to ask for reimbursement costs. The second check box is for future services. If you want only reimbursement, you select that. If you want only future service, you select that one. If you want both, you click both. So it's pretty much as simple as that. Then we give you 6 service areas for both reimbursements and 6 service area for future services that you can ask for. There's no magic number in 6, it's just the number that we could fit reliably on the page. So the service or assistance area is basically which of the 12 category or which of the allowable categories that you can ask for. So for example, let's say, again, back to my example, you bought $5,000 worth of cleaning supplies back in August. So that service or assistance area is a drop down and you would select cleaning supplies. You would then type in a short description about what that included. So it might have been, 50 bottles of Clorox or whatever. And then you would put in the total dollar amount. And let's say in this instance, it's $5,000. If there's another one, you would add that in and all the way down to item 6. If you have more than 6 service areas or 6 categories for which you're requesting funding, we do have the option for you to upload a file. And so if our boxes are insufficient, we would recommend that you put together an Excel document that identifies the funding area, that gives a description and gives a dollar amount, and upload it for the reimbursement section. Then there's a place for you to put a dollar amount in based on your total amount from your Excel document. You would just add that amount in, and what it does is it automatically generates the total amount that you are requesting for reimbursement. For future services, it's going to operate the same thing. So you would select any requests for future services by selecting a drop down of the allowable category, writing a short description, putting in a dollar amount, and that can also be an estimated dollar amount if you're not 100% sure, and filling out those 6. Again, if you have more than 6, you can upload an Excel document that has those additional services, a description, and the dollar amount. But again, put that dollar amount from your Excel file in the applicable place so that it will then add up all of these 6 areas plus whatever's in your Excel to give you a total amount that you're asking for future services. Then with that total amount from reimbursement plus the total amount from future services, it will give us the total amount that you are asking for in your EANS application. So this one is the one that's probably a little bit more involved than the other pages, but I did want to take a moment and really walk through this part with you. The next page, so when you finish your funding and you have all your numbers in, the next page would be for any supporting documentation that you would want to upload. Let me say very clearly, at this point, we do not need you to upload invoices or that sort of thing. If you're including it on your application, we're going to assume that you have an invoice or journal or some other documentation to show that you have purchased it for reimbursement. So that will come down the road. This is if you need to give us any additional supporting documentation that we have not otherwise captured in this application. And so what you would do here, I think we give you 3 or 4 places, and you would just select your file to upload, and then just give us a short description about what that file may be. This is not required, so if you don't have anything extra to add here, you can simply click on. It's just a place in case you need to provide us with any additional documentation for your application. The final page is the attestation, and this needs to be completed by that authorized representative who is certifying that the information in your application is true and correct, and that this person has the authority to submit this application on behalf of the school. And that is an electronic signature that you type out with the date of submission, and then in the bottom right corner of this web page, you will see a submit button. You click that submit, and then it is sent to us, and it includes the attachments that you have put in your application. So that's what you can expect to see for your application. Let's now talk about next steps, okay? Applications, again, as I mentioned earlier, will become available on March 1st, 2021 on the South Carolina Department of Education's EANS website, and will close at 11:59 p.m. on March 31st, 2021. Incomplete applications may result in delayed processing times. And if you need additional information or clarification, or if we have that, you let us know, and if we need any additional information or clarification, we will contact the person that you list as your EANS point of contact on the application. I do envision there to be some back and forth. We may have some back and forth conversation as we're reviewing it, may need to call and ask for some clarifications or questions. So I just share that as information as we're going to be kind of working through and feeling our way through this together. What will then happen is you will get a conditional, assuming everything is allowable, reasonable, and necessary. You've got all the information in the application. Assuming we're able to approve it, it will first be as a conditional approval. That is to say you are conditionally approved for what you have asked for, which would also include any negotiations or changed. And then once that deadline elapses on March 31st, and we know exactly how many people have applied and what the total amount asked for is, we will be able to do a final approval at that point, once we know exactly how much money is being asked in relation to the total amount of money that we have available. Again, the department may approve in full, in part, or may deny applications, but we're really hopeful of getting this information in and moving these forward as quickly as possible. We have for you in this website a number of resources we will be adding to this as we go along. The first and foremost of those is our EANS website that is now live on our agency website. Within that, but also linked in the second line here, are the allowable uses. That is those 12 categories for funding if you need to go back and review that. We're also including the U.S. Department of Education's EANS website, as well as a frequently asked questions document that the U.S. Department of Education has published. As Mr. Brown mentioned at the beginning of this session, we will take any questions that have come through this presentation today and do an FAQ document based on your questions for anything that we haven't answered, and we'll post that to our SC EANS website, I hope, by next week. So you'll have that information available as well. At this point, I want to queue up our colleagues at Catapult Learning. Again, as I shared with you earlier, Catapult Learning is our premier provider for 4 of the 12 services, 12 allowable areas, and we're really excited to work and partner with them. And as you think about your application, as we all think about these applications together, there are some instances where we don't know what we don't know. And so Catapult is now going to talk with you about the services that they provide to maybe get some wheels turning and get some ideas going about the kinds of things that you private schools working with Catapult can include in your application. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to John Ware and Annette Charles, our friends at Catapult Learning. John and Annette.
Hi, thank you, John. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. And we are delighted to be on this WebEx with you to share information about Catapult Learning. I am joined by John Ware, who is our Director of School Partnerships, Devin Weibel, who is our Vice President of Academics, Joanne Hawley, who is our Regional Director for the state of South Carolina. So we just wanted to share with everyone today information about Catapult Learning and how we will be able to partner with you on this journey of EAMS. So moving to the next slide, let me just give you a quick overview of who we are. I want to point your attention to the bottom of the screen. We have already created an email address where schools can reach out to us. John, Joanne, and I will be monitoring this email address, this inbox, and it is sceames@catapultlearning.com. So you can expect a response from us within 24 hours, but we are generally a little bit faster than that. We are eager to help you understand the uses and to provide services for you. So a little bit about Catapult Learning. We are the national leader of educational services for non-public schools. We've been in business since 1976, so over 45 years of providing services, working with over 90,000 students served annually in your non-public schools, working with over 15,000 teachers, 2,100 non-pub schools. We're partnered in 38 states. So we work with lots and lots of students, teachers, administrators throughout the United States. I have responsibility for the southern region of the US. So I lead our instructional and professional development programs in 9 states in the South. So North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, Florida, and Oklahoma. So we are well covered in the South. As I mentioned, Joanne leads our program in South Carolina and is doing lots of work with the diocese thus far. So on the right, you'll just see who our partners include. So we generally work with all non-public schools, and we are very excited for this opportunity. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John, who will talk with you a bit more in depth about our services. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Annette. And if we could move to the next slide, I also just wanted to start by thanking you all for your time today and thanking John and his team for this opportunity. We really appreciate the work all of you all do each and every day to educate students across South Carolina and for your commitment to providing safe, in-person learning environments for your students, your families, and your teachers. As the father of 4 kids who have all been in middle school, high school, or college age, I know exactly what the impacts of this pandemic have been. And it's such a great commitment for you all to be providing in-person learning this year. And we really appreciate that. 9 months ago, when we had our first conversation with the state, it was during the initial round of funding, during the CARES funding. And we were exploring a potential partnership with the state to be sort of the CARES provider of these equitable services. And we talked about how we felt uniquely positioned to support students in South Carolina. And we discussed a bypass model where Catapult has had relationships with the U.S. Department of Education to provide targeted intervention and math services to Title I eligible students in 2 states, Missouri and Virginia, to hundreds of students across hundreds of schools in those states. And so we floated this idea then, and ultimately, as we all know, those CARES funds flowed down to the LEAs, and we began working, Catapult, I and Joanne began actively working with many of you all in the state of South Carolina. In some instances, school by school, and others we were working with schools pooling their funds together to provide shared services, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But in reflection of that meeting on May 28th, it was somewhat of a rehearsal, if you will, for where we find ourselves today. And we're really grateful to be in this position. So the LEAs that we normally negotiate our non-public schools through when we're talking about providing title services, as you know now, are no longer in the equation. It is just the state, perhaps to some chagrin to the state, but we are confident that they know that we are capable and qualified and eager to work with you, and we look forward to doing so. If we could move to the next slide, please. So it was talked about earlier in the opening, and I want to extend our gratitude to the South Carolina Catholic Conference and the other non-public associations in the state. I've been approached recently, and so has Annette, folks in Catapult are saying, what's going on in South Carolina? Because there's a lot of internal discussion around our conversations with you. And you all are really ahead of most states. I will just tell you in terms of the support that you have. And when I answer that question is what's going on, I think there are three dynamics really. And it starts at the governor's house. You all have strong leadership, and your state superintendent is trying to ensure that these federal funds are properly channeled down to your private schools, and we greatly appreciate that. There's also the strong advocacy that we've seen from the South Carolina Catholic Conference and the other independent schools, and we're particularly grateful for that. And then there's just what I'll call the growing number of public-private partnerships that we've been forming in South Carolina, largely through the Diocese of Charleston. You'll see we began very modestly in 2018, delivering professional development. I believe it was around math and problem solving and numeracy for a school. And then we followed that up with some coaching. We grew that partnership to include 16 days of coaching in the Myrtle Beach area, where we supported schools throughout the entire school year last year, even through COVID. And I would just point out that our leadership coach who worked in those 4 schools there is from Aiken, South Carolina. And I would like to just share with you that when he's working with school leaders over an extended period of time, he encourages them to think of their WIGs, right? What are their wildly important goals that they hope to accomplish over the course of that year or 2 years? And as you think of these EANS funds today, that's kind of the mindset I would encourage you to embrace. What are the big things that we can do to really make a difference as we come out of COVID? Some of the care services we did provide to the non-public schools included special services like counseling. We believe there's a great need for counseling today, and we'll talk more about that. Nursing and tutoring services. And we also provided an array of professional development and self-care sessions. And I did want to point out here that the nursing role that we filled has been a new specialized service for us. And those nurses provided early temperature checks for kiddos coming into schools in the morning and then during the midday, and just essentially alleviating some of the burden that had typically fallen to administration. So those are additional types of services we can offer. I did want to point out we're not necessarily providing COVID testing kits here, but just expanding the capacity for us to help you meet that allowable service. And then lastly, I did want to draw attention to the fact that we're delighted to be presenting to the entire Diocese of Charleston next Friday on the 5th. And we're delivering a session on Introduction to Social and Emotional Learning, which is such a critical skill set for us all to be embracing now during COVID. So if we can go forward. So I'm not sure if the COVID recovery imperative is the right title here, but I would encourage everyone to just think about how can you focus your EANS funds and tie them into some wildly important goals to make a really big difference. To me, I think about the timeline John mentioned a moment ago with the application coming out and then the process of review and then the process of approval. I think of this slide as your 30, 60, 90 days. We know there's a 6-month obligation period, which means you need to be submitting to the state what your educational plan is, or any reimbursements you may be making, or any material or equipment purchases. But as it applies to programs around the impacts of the pandemic and learning loss in particular, and how do we restore students to grade level and ensure that teachers are well equipped, and also considering extended learning opportunities, we really encourage you to think of what you can do now. And one of the first things you can do, as Annette mentioned, is look to schedule time with us. We're having one-on-one conversations with schools across the country. Another state that is very closely in alignment with you is Indiana. I just had a conversation earlier this week with Evansville Christian School And they told us that they're in need of hiring additional resource teachers to serve students with special needs in the classroom. And they wanted to know if that would be an allowable use. And I said, absolutely, because when we talk about initiating and maintaining education and support services to address learning loss, that population in particular has probably been affected as much as any. We've had conversations with schools around wanting to hire social workers, and that is also another allowable expense. And to tie it back to something John said earlier, these funds are not allowable to go to you to hire those folks, but they can come to Catapult through this partnership, and we can provide those types of supports for you and your students and your families going forward. So please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out to us and begin some of these conversations. We'd love to be able to start vision planning with you for what you can do going forward. And the last point I would make before turning this over to Devin is to, again, think big. This is a 27-month allocation. So just to put this in perspective, for those of you that might be looking at redeveloping instructional plans or putting in summer learning, that can happen as early as this summer. Maybe you give staff a little bit of a break and families a little bit of a break, but if you positioned a 2 or 4 week summer program on the front end of your next calendar year, that's a great way to get this started. But you need to have those funds obligated before August. That's 6 months out, August. So we'd rather have those plans obligated sooner than later. But then recognize those interventional programs that otherwise normally are only eligible to Title I kids. We could put those targeted intervention programs in place for the full 36-week school year next year, the 2021-22 school year. These funds could be used again next summer for summer programming, and they could be used again for the following year for intervention, for counseling, for nursing, for tutoring, for the services that you'll hear more about from Devin in just a moment. But the allowable areas are cited here below, and John touched on them earlier. Again, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you all, and we hope we will begin having some more in-depth conversations with each of you around how you would like to apply these funds to build out your COVID recovery plan and put these EANS funds to use. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Devin Weibel, who's our Vice President of Academics. She's instrumental behind our education-based curriculum, and she has some wonderful ideas for you all to consider as you think about applying these EANS funds to support learning loss and restoring your students to grade level. So if we can advance to the next screen, I'll turn it over to Devin. Thank you.
Great, thanks, John and Annette, and I really appreciate the invitation to join you today. So thank you to each of you for sticking with us and learning a little bit more about how we can partner to really support your entire school community, your students, your staff, faculty, leaders, and your families. We recognize, I know, we've lived it with so many school partners and across the last year, the deep impact that COVID has had on your students in terms of their academic achievement, but really on their just mental and social emotional health. And so we designed some programs to support not only academics, but really the whole child, and thinking about your schools and your families and how we can put in programs through partnership with each of you to really support as we get back into school, hopefully full in person next year. So we can look at the next slide. We're just going to talk a little bit more around what are some of the ways that we're able to support. And we really put the child at the center of all of this work. We recognize that by supporting your school community, by supporting your families, that we're really able to support the whole student in, feeling safe in their school, developing their social emotional skills. And then with all of those things happening, it's also going to really improve their achievement in the classroom. So we do that first, always by starting with data. What do we know about students and their academic and SEL needs? So we use data that you have, or we can do some diagnostic assessment to really figure out what are the areas where we can provide support to the student and the school community. We have targeted intervention and tutoring programs that John spoke about a little bit. I'm going to dig in a little bit more to that. but we can also support your school community in thinking about curriculum mapping. So as we go back into the fall, I know we're only in at the end of February, but as we start to plan for back to school next year, what key areas do students need support in their core classroom? How can we really provide additional reinforcement in some of those power standards to allow students to accelerate into grade level content really quickly, making sure that we close achievement gaps and provide that foundation for students to grow quickly into grade level, but stay strong as they go throughout the full into academic year. The SEL side can't be stressed enough, as each of you know. Our kids have been through so much trauma. All of us really have been through so much trauma. So how can we really support your school communities? We have an amazing social emotional learning curriculum that can be used as part of the core program, but also in our intervention programs as well. We can also provide support with counseling and social work. And then we have great family engagement and family support. And then at the foundation of each of these, when we think about supporting our kids through academic support and social emotional support, is professional development and coaching, really supporting your staff, supporting your school leadership in implementing systems that will support long-term capacity building and growth as we grow out of the pandemic and grow into the future. So as we look at the next slide, we're gonna just dig in a little bit more around what does it mean when we talk about academic support? And I know Annette spoke at the very beginning, Catapult has been doing this work for over 45 years, and we've supported, support typically in an average year of 100,000 students. This year, we've been doing a lot of work virtually and hybrid as well, so continuing that support. And then with professional learning, we support over 25,000 teachers a year. And really, we tend to focus on literacy and math, but we also want to make sure that we're supporting students with fun, enrichment, project-based learning that allows them to really see their learning come to life. So if you're thinking about, I've got a great tutoring program already set up, we can also come in and bolster the work that you're doing in your schools with high-quality STEM, STEAM, and robotics, as well as other types of enrichment programs to support your, as that whole child as we continue to think about how do we improve academic achievement. Our programs are all rooted in data, so we really focus on using data to create individual plans. We tailor the program to fit the specific needs of your school community, thinking about, pull-out intervention. We can do after school or before school, and even work with some schools on the weekends to make sure that students are getting the support that they need. In one-to-one or small group work, we have a proprietary curriculum, which I'll speak a little bit more about in a second, to make sure that we're targeting areas of support, getting students, that support they need in the areas where they're showing a decline, and then really have that strong communication with the core teacher so that we're continuing to support that tier 1 instruction that is so crucial to students continuing to hit their growth targets. We often get the question, well, who does all this work? Who provides the instruction? We actually employ over 5,000 educators across the country. So we are able to work with you to hire, train, and deploy educators into your system to really support the work. But we can also hire your teachers to do this work as well. So we work with you to really find the right match for your school system. Depending on the program, we also have worked with college students, college educated or college students who come in and act like in our enrichment program as a mentor, as a coach, to really provide strong support for students. And so as we think about, the academic support side, let's dig in on the next slide with just a little bit around our curriculum. Obviously, it's important that when we're doing this work that everything we do be research and evidence-based, and our programs are that. We really are designed around supporting students who, for whatever reason, have fallen a little bit behind in reading or math. So our programs are designed specifically to support students in areas in which they are struggling. We target that through data to really pinpoint where students and small groups of students need support. And then we're able to really focus on those learning goals to help mitigate any loss that has happened over the last 11 months. As I mentioned before, we can augment all of this work with really high quality, fun and engaging STEM, robotics, virtual field trips. We use this often to drive engagement. We do this in person or virtually as well, and really just want to give students opportunities to take what they're learning in their core classroom and apply it. See what it looks like when they apply all of the skills they're learning to a real world problem, and they have the opportunity to really construct meaning, iterate, work together, and build those 21st century skills. Everything we do is really personalized to the learner. We also work really closely with you, our partner, to make sure that what we're doing is supportive of the environment that you have built in your school, and really make sure that the work that we do, it feels like an extension of the work that you are doing while we supplement the core instruction that is already happening in your building. We can work with you also on family support. We do a lot of work with families through, making sure that they understand what we're working on with their students, sending materials home to extend that learning and support, but also through family engagement and work to really make sure that families feel supported as they create strong learning environments for their kiddos at home. Everything we do is age and developmentally appropriate. We want to really encourage students to work on complex text based on their age and work on challenging math questions so that we're always building into encouraging a rigorous environment so that students are transferring the skills they learn with us into their core classroom and then beyond into their everyday life. So we spent a little bit of time talking about academic support. We know that's crucial, but when we think about that other big piece of the puzzle, we're going to look at the next slide and just talk a little bit about the importance of social emotional support. Given the pandemic and the challenges that we've all faced over the past 11 months, we know that the impact across, it's hit every corner of our lives. So even students who were high performing or even who are now still high performing may need some additional support from a counselor or a social worker. You may have families that haven't needed that kind of support in the past that need that support now. And so we are able to work with you to deploy counseling programs. We have an amazing family engagement program where we really work with families, again, to build social emotional supports at home. And we have professional development for your schools and staff focused on the 5 competencies of CASEL, bringing trauma-informed practices into the classroom, and even have developed recently a teacher self-care session that really focuses on making sure that our educators are taking care of themselves, because we know that when we take care of ourselves, we can do a better job of really supporting our students and their families in our classes. Similar to what we do in the academic side, we really do use data to develop growth plans. We want to understand areas where students need support. We have lessons that can be deployed on a daily basis, are part of our intervention program. And then, as I mentioned before, we have great counselors, social workers that can really partner to work with families and students because we recognize that if we support the whole child, that we're going to see significant improvement in academics in a much shorter amount of time. So I just want to dig in really quickly to give it, what does this look like in action? So if we look at the next slide, we see just, and again, this is a model of what this could look like in your school. We can do this during the school day. We can also do it before or after school, but this is our acceleration framework. We really want to focus on making sure students are supported in a small group environment. So about 4 students per group, where we work with students for up to 60 minutes on academic and social emotional goals that have been defined based on diagnostic data, as well as data that we're capturing from other stakeholders like our educators and our families. From that, we create an individualized student plan. That plan really drives what our teacher is working on in that small group environment. We're coming back, we're looking at those goals, and we're developing lessons, deriving learning objectives to really support those goals. And then we're progress monitoring along the way to make sure that students are making progress. Every 6 weeks, we do an assessment to check for growth, making sure that we're hitting our projected growth targets. It's really essential that students are growing because we're trying to close that learning gap. So we're setting really lofty growth targets in order to make sure that we're able to close the learning gap, the achievement gap, and make sure that kids are actually accelerating into grade level work. And so as we think about this framework, I want to talk about a little bit deeper about what that social emotional component looks like in this framework, but also really as the backbone to so many of the programs that we can run over the summer. So as you're thinking about your plans and we start to think about, well, what can I do right now to support my schools and school community? And then one of the big ways that we're starting to talk to schools right now is really supporting learners and families through really high quality summer programs. And so if we go to the next slide, I just want to share with you kind of a core component to the work that we do here as we think about supporting students' social emotional health and providing really great strategies, mindfulness strategies that will support them as they face other stressful or anxiety producing situations. So at the core of our program, especially in our summer programs, also in our acceleration framework that I just spoke about, we are supporting students' social emotional learning. We are working on 21st century skills. We are building resilience and empathy and giving students strategies that they can engage with in the classroom or in the real world. One of the ways that we do this is by working through mindfulness. So when we're working or dealing with a challenging situation, what are strategies we can do to take some of that anxiety away or stress away? How can I recognize when my body is in a state of stress? How can I calm myself? Because then I'm going to be able to better respond to the situation with my full self versus a self that is kind of shut down because of the anxiety or stress I was feeling. So this also builds into, if we go to the next slide, again, the work that we do when we could start right now for students and families that really need this support, carry this through over the summer. It's also part of all the summer programs that we run. And then into next school year and years beyond is counseling. So we talked a little bit about social emotional learning that can be deployed by the classroom teacher or by one of our interventionists. But when we think about kind of a deeper need, there may be families who have more significant need or students who have more significant need for counseling support. And so we have sessions that are done individual that focus on academic and behavioral challenges to really support academic achievement. We also make sure, of course, that the families and teachers are involved through consultation. And then we have small group counseling as well, or advisory groups that can be run, again, to support students that have common goals in that more rigorous counseling setting. I spent some time at the beginning talking about the enrichment we offer. So I want to share just a little bit more. If we go to the next slide, enrichment is an amazing way for all learners to really have opportunities, one, to work with their hands and do project-based work, but two, really to see the learning that they're doing in school come to life. These are fun project-based ways for our kids to really develop opportunities to work on hands-on projects and to construct their own learning. So each of these different programs has a very explicit literacy component where students are reading and writing and speaking about the work that they are doing. It has explicit math built in where students are working through real-world math problems. And then, of course, it's tied to the next generation science standards. So students are working on high-quality science experiments as well. And then we bring in lots of course, informational text. So students are getting access to text that they're going to see on assessments. They're engaging with those texts, asking questions about those texts, and using evidence from that reading to really design their projects. So in our STEM camp, it is an engineering design-based program. It does not require technology. And so students are actually engaging with different themes, anything that ranges from space exploration to the human body. This is designed for students from kindergarten early learner up through 12th grade. We also have a STEAM set of programs for pre-K through second. So in the younger students, we have a program called EPIC 365. This is really about building and designing fine and gross motor skills. So with our youngest learners, one of the things that's been hard in the pandemic is we often lose some of those basic skills. And so making sure students are doing a lot of sensory work, This program was designed with an occupational therapist, and so really has great ways to get students engaged while they also explore the world around them. Our STEAM camp takes a little bit of a twist on the traditional STEM, like adding art and architecture. Students examine colors and lines and shapes, and they see how those things are all around in the world around them, and they examine them and do some really amazing projects. And then finally, my absolute favorite is robotics. It's a program that works for our youngest learners in kindergarten up through 12th grade. And at the core of the program, students are learning the principles of coding. As they get older, they work with more rigorous robots, and they begin to actually learn how to code. And so this is a great thing. As you know, coding is an important language to learn, or at least the basics of coding. And it really is all about problem solving. So as kids get older, they're working with technology. They're actually able to see their coding come to life in a real robot and engage with that robot in really fun ways. So if we take kind of the culmination of the different programs I spoke about, we're going to talk a little bit about the summer. I think, summer is a great opportunity for kids to have a lot of fun, get comfortable back, hopefully in our classrooms, through enrichment, through SEL, but also adding in some of these instructional components in reading and in math. One of the great parts of partnering with Catapult is our flexibility. We work with a lot of different schools who have different needs. And so we can help you design a program that runs as like a 2-week back to school boot camp to really supercharge students as they get back to school. Or maybe so that's like your 30, 40-hour option, or something that's longer. We run programs that are, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week for 5 weeks, 6 weeks over the summer. And so depending on the needs of your community and your families, we really are able to tailor with you a program that fits your needs. And we also, again, when we think about staffing for the summer, we're able to, hire your teachers. It's a great opportunity for teachers also to engage with their students in the summertime and see some of these cool projects that they get to design with their kids. It's a great opportunity also to really have that time to reduce learning loss. We know summer is a hard time already for many of our kids. And so students who have been impacted by COVID, the summer could be a great opportunity to, catch them up, building foundations, reinforcing foundational knowledge, but also prevent further regression. So I just wanted to show a couple quick sample schedules. So on the next slide, we have, again, flexibility is key. So what a 3-hour day or 4-hour day or 5-hour day could look like. This kind of could look a little bit different in each place. Our curriculum is designed to be flexible to support these different options. And again, really it's working with you and your school-based teams to design programs that fit into the model that is best for your families and your school community. You'll notice that each of the programs have similar components. We always do math and reading, and then we have enrichment and social emotional learning. As the day gets longer, we make sure that we always build in, time, movement time, recess time, as well as meals if needed. And then finally, one of the things that's at the core of doing this work and really supporting as we move to the next slide is supporting your staff. And we talked a little bit about this throughout the presentation, but just wanted to come back and call this out as, an important part of the work that each of you are doing as we are supporting your school community. And so there's, again, academic support, social emotional support. And one of those ways that we called out is just thinking about how we design curriculum to support your schools as you go into next year. So I want to hand it back over to John and Annette, but thank you so much for your time. We look forward to partnering with you and working with you over the summer and next year.
Thanks, Annette. And we just got a note from Ryan. I know we're at time here, and I just wanted to echo Devin's sentiments to say thank you to everyone. We are thrilled to be in partnership with the state, and we welcome the opportunity to speak individually with any and all of you that would like to speak with us. So please let us know, and we look forward to the road ahead. Thank you very much.
And thank you, John, Devin, and Annette, for your time today. Again, as means of a wrap up, we do have our SC Eanes email address. So if you have any questions or issues regarding that, of course, the Eanes email address that Catapult has provided. And I do want to underline what John talked about, which is we all know that COVID-19 has had a significant impact on our students. And that is true for students, I believe, in public schools as well as private schools. So I do encourage you to connect with our colleagues at Catapult Learning. They do offer robust programs that can support. And while cleaning supplies and PPE are important, the real important thing is making sure that we're doing everything that we can to support our students in meeting their individual needs and addressing the adverse effect caused by COVID-19. Just again, as a short reminder about the timeline, on Monday, March 1st, we will post the Eanes application to our agency Eanes website. Those applications will be due back to us by 11:59 p.m. on March 31st. We will then, as we get them in, we'll start reviewing. You will get a conditional approval, and then we'll be finalizing those amounts in early April, along with having a second technical assistance session with our partner who will be helping us in terms of managing the funds and the reimbursements. We do have to have the funds obligated, which is kind of budgeted or contracted by August, but we do have until September 30th, 2023 to spend all of the funds. So you do have a number of opportunities for future services, specifically with Catapult Learning, and I hope that you're able to connect with them. This concludes our presentation. I know we've gone about 6 minutes over our original planned timeline, but we are excited to partner with you. We'll be working through this together. And again, we thank you for not only your time, but more importantly, for the work that you have done and continue to do on behalf of your students. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, everyone, and we will get this meeting posted, the recording, as well as answer the questions in writing that were posed today. The meeting recording and the slides will be posted at the web link that I just posted in the chat, and I can also send this out to everyone that registered as well. So thank you for joining, and hope you have a great rest of your week.